there. Thank you so much for joining me for this seminar. If you're not familiar with who I am, I'm Elly McLean. I'm a holistic nutritionist. I base myself out of Torquay, which is on the surf coast in Victoria, Australia, but I have only been here for about the last year or so. So prior to that, I was based out of Melbourne, which means I see people from all over the place. So I work in one-on-one nutrition, and I practice as what I would consider a functional and holistic practitioner. And my clients span from Melbourne, the surf coast, Australia, and I have international clients as well. So it's an absolute pleasure to be sharing this insight with you in celebration of National Vegan Week. And hopefully by the end of this session, you're feeling really empowered about what it is that you can do to better understand your current state of health and how your diet may or may not be currently supporting you, and then use that as a measure of progression. Before we get stuck into that, though, maybe just learning a little bit about my nutritional journey would be of interest. So I am predominantly plant-based. I would say 99% of my diet is derived from plants, and I have a small amount of animal food in the form of eggs. And that's a personal decision that I've made after, the journey, my own personal journey when it comes to plant-based nutrition. So I first went plant-based in 2011. I was living in the United States at the time, and I was just completely turned off by the animal produce industry, to be honest. And I found myself reaching this point where I couldn't quite believe how artificial the production of meat had become. This process of having to feed chickens in particular was what really turned me off, having to feed them hormones to make them grow quick enough to allow them to be more profitable, feeding them antibiotics to ensure that they were actually able to survive the maturation process, because the environment that they were growing in was so hostile and not conducive to them, making it through their 18 days of life before being slaughtered. So I reached this position where I thought, you know what? I don't want to support that industry. I want to help take pressure off the industry, because, the industry is really only responding to what the demands of the consumer is putting out there. So I wanted to take pressure off the industry, and also didn't want to be exposing my body to hormones and antibiotics unnecessarily. So that was the start of my journey in 2011. And in that time, I've had periods of incredible health, periods of not so incredible health. I had times of eating more animal protein, and it's been really interesting. It's what's inspired me to, as a nutritionist, really delve into that area in more detail, so I can educate specifically in the area of plant-based nutrition. It's not the only area in which I work. So with my one-on-one clients, they don't have to be plant-based just to work with me. With my one-on-one clients, really the nutritional goals that we set are based on their health requirements at any given time, and also their preferences and their lifestyle. So that's the work that I do one-on-one. But then I also have an online program which is dedicated very much to plant-based nutrition, and that is called Plant-Based Kickstarter, really designed for those who want to take on a plant-based diet but don't really know where to start. Similarly, it is more than appropriate for those that are already following a plant-based diet and feel that perhaps they need to shape things up a little bit, whether it be that their energy levels are starting to flail, or that they're starting to put on a little bit of weight, or that they're just, their stage in life is changing. So perhaps they're looking at getting pregnant, or they're recovering from pregnancy and birth and in that postpartum phase, or perhaps they're taking on a level of training that they haven't engaged in before. Or maybe they're reaching perimenopause and coming out the other side of that after menopause, and wanting to reassess things at that point in time. So Plant-Based Kickstarter is very much geared towards the plant-based community, those that are either new to it or already part of it. And if you want to check it out, you're more than welcome to head over to my website, which is nutritionally.com, and there's plenty of information there. There's also lots of information on my blog. So if there's any of the testing that we talk about today, there's a good chance, and you want to learn more about it, there's a good chance there'll be insights on my blog at nutritionally.com as well. Well, let's talk about blood testing, because that's what this session is all about. So blood testing 101, understanding your pathology. I think this is really important. You know, there are people that don't like getting blood testing done, like my partner, who I've been hassling to get blood tests for the last few years. But I think when you're on a plant-based diet or considering a largely plant-based diet, it's actually really important. It can't be underestimated, this importance of understanding your pathology, because the blood and what's happening in our blood gives us the window to our nutrient status, and it helps us to understand how our organs and our systems are functioning. So with this information, whether it be on your own or with a practitioner, I'd really encourage that it is with a practitioner, you can create a highly tailored, highly specific dietary approach. And that dietary approach may also need to be supplemented with nutraceuticals or nutritional supplements. And then you can use blood testing to monitor how that approach is working for you. And that way, you're specific, right? You're getting really specific with your needs and requirements. So often people say to me, should I be on a plant-based diet, or can I go plant-based? And I say, well, let's have a look at you. How are you feeling? Let's have a look at your blood work. Let's have a look at what your body is trying to tell us about your food choices. And that's what I would call bioindividuality, rather than, necessarily just doing what your friend's doing because that works for them. And same goes for supplements. One of my pet hates as a practitioner is individuals who have a supplement drawer that is so deep that they have no idea what's in there anymore, and they've also have no idea of why the stuff is in there anymore. I don't think that's a very effective use of money, first and foremostly. And secondly, it can get really dangerous. So if there's this scattergun approach to nutritional supplements, it can actually get dangerous in the sense that you might be supplementing incorrectly. So you may have decided that you have an iron deficiency and started supplementing with iron, when in actual fact it wasn't iron, it was B12. And so you're not actually rectifying that deficiency. That's just one example. And on the flip side, you may be perpetuating a potential level of toxicity. Vitamin D is a great example. So vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, which means our body stores it. And a lot of people have probably heard about how great vitamin D is for us. And I would absolutely sit in the pro vitamin D camp, which we'll talk about in this session. But because it is fat soluble, vitamin D levels can build to toxic levels. So if you're supplementing blindly and you're not doing the pathology or the blood testing regularly to see where the vitamin D levels are at, then you may reach toxic levels. Don't get me wrong, I've probably only ever seen one client in my 5 years of practice who is getting close to toxic levels, but all the same, I would hate for that to be a cause for ill health in anybody, because it is absolutely avoidable. So if you're resonating with the idea of having that deep supplement drawer, great, then this seminar is for you, and hopefully it inspires you to get really specific with your protocol and your approach and to go and get some blood testing. If you're already consuming a largely or entirely plant-based diet and you haven't done any pathology before, then this seminar is absolutely for you. Or if you're intending on consuming a largely or entirely plant-based diet for a period of 6 months or more, I believe it is incredibly important that you are understanding of where your pathology is at, and also understanding of how your diet and or your supplement choices may need to be tweaked in order to help maximize things for you. Ultimately, our diet should support our best quality of life. That's why I do what I do, because I want to help people prevent disease or overcome diseases as naturally as they possibly can, and or feel the best they possibly can, which doesn't always mean there's a disease in place, but something is less than optimal. And I think that's where holistic health can be of most service to the community, in fact. So let's dive into some of the blood measures that you should be looking at taking. Or actually, before we get there, I just wanted to set the scene a little bit with how you might obtain blood tests. So as a nutritionist, I can't get my clients' blood testing covered by Medicare, which means there's two choices. You either pay for your blood tests out of pocket, which is absolutely an option, and there are platforms like iScreen where you can actually go and select the blood testing you want to have done. You can purchase a pathology form and take that directly to the pathology centre. Your bloods will be drawn, and the results will be emailed to you. If you have a practitioner that you're working with in the holistic space, then great, because you will have support in analysing those results. The other option is to go via your doctor. And you can start taking some notes in this session and use those to feed the discussion that you had with your doctor. So you might take the list from this chat and explain to your doctor that you would like to start assessing the quality of your diet, perhaps what changes you might need to make to your diet, and as a result, they will write up your pathology slip, which you can then take to the lab and pathology, and they will draw the bloods, and the results will go back to your doctor. You can then either work with the doctor on analysing the results and creating a treatment plan, or you can work with a more holistic practitioner like a nutritionist or a naturopath who can help you in, I guess, creating a functional assessment of your blood test results. And that's the lens that I'm going to be talking that's the lens that I'm going to be looking through in talking to you today about these recommended blood test measures. So what on earth is a functional lens? Well, when you get blood testing, and as you may have noticed before, when you get blood testing, there is a reference range, and that reference range most of the time in Australia is not determined based on what is optimal. It is determined based on the people that go and get blood testing done. So the labs will determine what sits in the middle 90%. So take away the bottom fifth of test results, take away the top fifth of test results, and often, not in all tests, but in many, the result is actually a reflection of everything that sits in that middle 90%. That's not ideal, right? Who goes to get blood tests in Australia? Usually it's people who are either in a state of disease or certainly not at a level of optimal health. So from my perspective and from the perspective of a functional health practitioner, we're not using the reference range on the lab report. We are using functional reference ranges, which means we're looking at whether or not your results sit you in an optimal position. And then we're also using the labs to create like a storybook. And each one of the tests may be like a chapter in the storybook. So your iron studies, your full blood examination, your total and active B12, they may each be chapters of the book. But when we look at all of those together, it tells a whole story. And then we can use that whole story to put your treatment protocol and your plan together. So that's what I would consider to be a functional approach, just so you can understand the difference between the measures that I'm going to share with you versus what you might see in a lab test that you've already had done in the past, or that you're going to be doing in the near future. Because all the time I will have clients who send me a copy of their blood test results, and they'll email and say, doctor said everything was fine, so no urgency for our next consultation. Or sometimes it's individuals saying, doctor said everything was fine, like, please can we chat ASAP, because I don't feel like everything is fine, and I want to understand what's going on. Actually, that's probably that happens often at the moment. So yeah, that's what functional testing is. Now, let's have a look at what some of the recommended markers are, and this is where you can get out your pen and start taking some notes. First of all, iron studies. Arguably one of the most important and not that hard a test to get done via a GP. The important thing though is you're asking for your iron studies and not just letting a ferritin test be done. Because the iron studies, it is the whole chapter. There's 4 points of information in the iron studies, and we need all of those points of information for the chapter of the book to be complete. So on an iron study panel, we will receive iron, ferritin, transferrin, and transferrin saturation. And they are in order of least importance to most important. So up there at the most important markers on this study, the transferrin and the transferrin saturation, and often these go missed. Not a lot of attention is placed on these results. But this is where we can get really individual and specific with understanding the individual's level of iron health and status. So we have stored iron, and our body's job is to help take that stored iron and take it to the cells where it can be used. So this is where transferrin and transferrin saturation become really helpful. So transferrin, think of it as like a taxi on a road. It's a transport protein. It is what helps to transport the iron from one place to another. When transferrin is higher than what it should be, and in females, it should be between 2 and 2.5 grams per litre. When it is higher than this, it is a sign that the body wants more iron. So it's putting more taxis on the road, okay? And then we have transferrin saturation. And transferrin saturation is a measure of how much iron is attached to the transport protein. So how much is ultimately going to be delivered to the cells. If it's too high, then it can mean that too much iron is being transported and potentially dumping, and overload and toxicity will take place. If the saturation is low, then it means that not enough iron is being transported, and therefore there could be manifestation of signs of iron deficiency, and it could progress to an iron deficiency anemia. We ideally want that saturation in women to be 20 to 30%, in men 30 to 40%, and that may change, or these markers in general may change a little bit during pregnancy. There are so many variables which can impact these markers. So that's why I highly recommend that you're working with a practitioner to better understand what your markers are trying to tell you. But ultimately, we want those transferrin and the transferrin saturation to be in that optimal range. And that then helps us to see if the ferritin is adequate, and ferritin is the stored iron. On a reference, on a pathology form, usually about a 30 is considered the bottom of the reference range. And to be honest, in some women, they can function very, very well at a level of 30, but some people need to be higher. And we will know that based on their transferrin and transferrin saturation numbers. And then pregnancy and preconception are another sort of example of whereby 30 might not be enough, or it just won't be enough. When you're getting iron studies tested, there's some important consideration. Number one, you want to be fasted for 12 hours. Some doctors may not actually request that you're fasted for the test result, and that is because they're not looking at the results through this more sensitive and functional lens. But ideally, you want to be fasted for 12 hours, not too much more than that, and certainly not less than that to get the most accurate result. You also want to get C-reactive protein, or CRP, we say for short, because this is an inflammatory marker. And sometimes low-grade inflammation can actually impact the iron studies. So we want to know that, so when we're reading the results, we can understand, is there another variable here that's impacting these numbers? In women, I tend to recommend that you don't get it done during menstruation if you still menstruate. So you try and get it done outside of the days of your period. Any other variables here? No, they would be most of them. So that's your iron studies. Really important to get done if you're feeling fatigue, if you're wanting to get pregnant, if you are pregnant, postpartum, if you're an athlete, if you're a menstruating female. Certainly, pre-starting a plant-based diet and in the middle of a plant-based diet, it is always good to check in with your iron studies. I recommend no less than every 12 months, just depending on where your levels are at. Then we move on to certainly important tests in the context of a plant-based diet, which is understanding our B12 levels. There are 2 markers of B12 that we can get done fairly easily through Medicare or a platform like iScreen, and that is total B12 and active B12. Active B12 is certainly a more accurate marker of B12 status at a cellular level. So that tends to be what I pay the most attention to. But again, if we're looking at or reading the whole chapter, it's really nice to see total B12 there. And I would also like to see a homocysteine result there. So total B12, ideally we want that around about 400. And then when it comes to active B12, we want to see that around about 100 picomoles per litre. Incredibly important. And then we look at the homocysteine figure, which is not a routine test. So typically speaking, homocysteine is used as a marker of cardiovascular disease risk, and a Western doctor would be looking at homocysteine through that lens and really only getting concerned when levels are quite high. From my perspective, though, homocysteine is a functional marker of B12 status and health. Homocysteine, just to give you a very brief, 101 on it, it is an amino acid, and we expect to see it in the blood, but we only expect to see it in a fairly finite range, which is between 7 and 7.5. Anything higher than that, or certainly anything less than that sometimes as well, but anything higher than that suggests that something is happening with what's called the methylation cycle, and this methylation cycle is crucial for helping to clear or recycle homocysteine. So if homocysteine is high, it suggests methylation needs support. And there are key nutrients required to support this methylation cycle, and they include, guess what, B12. They also include B9, to some degree B6, and depending on other genetic variables, there could be other requirements. But this is why I get homocysteine done in conjunction with B12, because it helps us to see, is your body getting enough B12 to help one of these very crucial processes? And if not, then chances are homocysteine will be left to rise. And I see it happening all the time. I have a number of plant-based clients who have never had functional assessment done, and we discover high homocysteine, which I actually consider to be really sad. It's a tragedy that people take on a plant-based diet because it is, so well known for its heart health potential, and it's so well known for its potential to help reduce inflammation and risk of inflammatory associated conditions, like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. But then if there is B12 deficiency, that will be leading in itself to inflammation, e.g. the high homocysteine, which is its own marker, its own predictor of cardiovascular disease risk. So incredibly important to understand where that active B12 is, also referred to as holotranscobalamin. If you're unsure as to why that's what your blood test says, holotranscobalamin, aka active B12, and key to get that homocysteine figure alongside it, remembering that that's our functional marker of B12 health and accessibility. Your doctor may question you as to why you're asking for homocysteine, because it wouldn't typically be done, certainly not if you're a seemingly young, healthy, fit and active person without a family history of cardiovascular disease. So you will need to be prepared for the conversation, and hopefully you've taken some notes on why we want homocysteine to be tested for, you know, when we're looking to go plant-based or when we are plant-based. There are different types of B12 supplements as well, which you may have already learned about this week. But we get B12 in the supplemental form in 3 different varieties. So we can get B12 in the cyanocobalamin form, we can get B12 in the methylcobalamin form, and we can get it in the hydroxycobalamin form. And again, seeing that homocysteine figure can help us to understand, you know, how much B12 is required for this individual, what type of B12 is required for this individual, and how long should they be on it for. Because B12, outside of a plant-based diet, like outside of entirely plant-based diet, adequacy isn't that hard to achieve when there's some animal proteins coming in, like eggs, for example, or maybe someone is still having, you know, dairy product, or maybe a little bit of fish. So it is important to understand, what is the dietary approach? Is it entirely plant-based? Is it largely plant-based? And then determine a schedule for supplementing from there. You know, a nice adjunct to this B12 chapter and this iron study chapter is the full blood examination or complete blood count, depending on what the lab specifically refers to it as. But this panel is where we get a look at a number of measures, but some of the most, we get a look at the measures associated with red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And some of the things that I dial in on here are the hemoglobin figure, MCV, which stands for mean corpuscular volume, and also the MCHC. These help us to understand whether or not the iron deficiency or the B12 deficiency has progressed to a state of anemia. And this is what I would consider like what we want to prevent. We want to pick up on iron and B12 inadequacy before we get to a state of anemia, just simply because the work we have to do is greater by that point. You know, like the hole we've dug is deeper, and getting out of it will take a little bit longer and a little bit more application. But nevertheless, we want to rule out anemia, so we get the complete blood count done alongside iron studies and B12 assessment. This can also help us to see how the immune system is going. So are we having the nutrients like zinc and vitamin C, which are crucial to supporting our white cells, or is there an infection present which could be influencing our white cells? A really interesting test to get done, and one that I'd always recommend doing prior to starting a plant-based diet, and certainly at those 12-month intervals, if not more regularly, when you are already on a plant-based diet. There are functional ranges for these markers as well. So the hemoglobin, the MCV, the MCHC, there are functional markers for this. And then there are also specific references during pregnancy, or specific reference ranges during pregnancy. So again, just making sure that you're seeking outside support in assessing these test results. One of the labs that I'm just talking about constantly at the moment is vitamin D. It surprises me. Well, number one, how many people don't get their vitamin D tested annually? And then number two, how many people have their vitamin D levels incorrectly assessed? So in Australia, the reference range for vitamin D starts at around about 50 nanomoles per litre. Actually, that's where it always starts, not around about. That's where it starts. So anything less than that is considered to be either moderate, mild or progressed vitamin D deficiency, and anything above that is considered to be acceptable. But vitamin D is so crucial to so many areas of health that from a functional point of view, we do not consider 50 nanomoles per litre to be acceptable. Vitamin D is crucial to supporting bone mineral density. And when you're on a plant-based diet, like, my God, we want all the help and opportunity we have to support bone mineral density. Not just plant-based diets, but females, pregnant women, women entering menopause. Like, it's so important that we optimize our bone mineral density. So vitamin D is key for that. It's crucial for cardiovascular health. For athletes, it's crucial. For individuals with low mood, we want optimal vitamin D to help buffer against that. And then it's crucial to the immune system and our ability to fight viral infection. Now, when we're looking specifically at viral protection, I was looking back through old textbooks, and we're looking at a vitamin D of 120 nanomoles per litre as being optimal there. So that's really where I set the bar for my clients. So we're not looking at this vitamin D of 50 nanomoles per litre. We are looking at the optimal, which is 120 nanomoles per litre. I will just leave it there. If you haven't had your vitamin D tested in the last 12 months, go and get it done. If you had your vitamin D tested in the last 12 months, go and look at what the number was. And if it was anything less than 120 nanomoles per litre, then you still have some work to do. And that work could mean that you need to speak with someone about how you supplement to optimize your vitamin D levels. It could mean that you're getting out and exposing your skin to some sun. That is obviously something that comes with its own risks. I wouldn't want anybody to be trying to soak up the vitamin D at the expense of premature aging or causing any skin damage or sunburn. And I say that because if you have sunscreen or clothing on, then your body won't be able to manufacture a vitamin D from the UVB rays. You need to have bare skin, no sunscreen, during daylight hours, ideally peak sun hours, in order for your body to synthesize vitamin D from those UVB rays. If you don't consume an entirely plant-based diet, there might be some sources of vitamin D within your diet. So from places like eggs or free-range eggs, in particular, grass-fed butter or good quality dairy. But if you're on an entirely plant-based diet, then really your options for optimizing your vitamin D come from skin exposure to the sun when it's safe, or supplementation. And sorry, I will just correct myself. If you eat fish, particularly oily fish, you may be getting some vitamin D from there. So moving on to our next chapter, which is zinc and copper. This forms part of the routine bloods that I get all of my clients to do, not just my clients on a plant-based diet. But, there are 7 nutrients that the American Dietetic Association has flagged as being nutrients that vegans and those on a plant-based diet need to pay close attention to. And one of those is zinc. So I'm very conscious of ensuring that everybody has optimal zinc levels, especially females, or especially those with a thyroid condition. And men, men have their own different, needs and requirements for zinc. So everybody. Zinc, again, if we're looking at reference ranges on the lab reports, the bottom of that reference range certainly isn't anywhere close to ideal and optimal. And in actual fact, to understand what's truly optimal for an individual, we want to see copper, because zinc and copper, they have like a seesaw effect, and you want them ideally to be on par, or you want zinc to be slightly higher. So when requesting your blood test results, if it's something you're going to go and do at the end of this week or the end of this seminar, you want to see if your doctor will not only refer you for zinc analysis, but for copper analysis as well. Copper can throw some people, as in, physicians might not understand what to do with a copper result. But from this perspective, we're wanting copper to ensure that we understand what the optimal zinc level is for you as an individual. Okay. So if your copper is incredibly high, then you have some work to do in increasing your zinc and reducing your copper to get them closer to on par. If your copper's somewhere in the middle and your zinc's low, then we know that there's just work to be done on getting those zinc levels up. So that's what I mean by ensuring you get the zinc and the copper done in the one test, so we can really set the right range or reference range for you. Finally, I want to talk on the lipid panel. And the reason for that is because I work with a lot of individuals with, concerns around metabolic health, whether that be because they have family history of metabolic disease like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke, overweight and obesity, high blood pressure as well, or because they are wanting to shift some body fat and maybe it's taken them longer or been harder than they would expect. I also work with a lot of women in the perimenopausal phase, which is a state of hormonal flux, which can impact metabolic health in women. And then I also work with a lot of athletes, so helping to optimize metabolism and energy production, obviously benefits the athletes, especially the endurance athletes, which are those that I tend to work with the most. So the lipid panel is just an important part of this understanding metabolic health and status. And on this lipid panel, we get total cholesterol, we get HDL or high density lipoprotein, we get LDL, which is low density lipoprotein, we get triglycerides, we also get total cholesterol to HDL ratio, and depending on the labs, there might be some other numbers on here. I think traditionally, the focus in this chapter has been on total cholesterol, but the research is actually showing that that's not where the focus should be. And to truly understand somebody's risk of metabolic disease and also understand, their risk of metabolic disease, we want to be looking at the triglyceride figure. We want to look at HDL, and we also want to look at the total cholesterol to HDL ratio. And we're not just using reference ranges on the labs. So triglycerides, we want to be between 0.5 and 1. Total cholesterol to HDL ratio, we want to be around about, 5, ideally less than 3.5. And HDL, we certainly want to be greater than 1. But if you're somebody who is currently being medicated or treated for a form of cardiovascular disease, whether that's just total cholesterol, high cholesterol levels, please make sure that you're asking for this full lipid panel and that perhaps you're seeking the advice of a functional health professional who can help you to truly understand not just your medication requirements, but how you could also be adjusting your diet and lifestyle to support here. And the other, chapter that we want to have done to support in this part of the story are things like our fasting blood glucose, where we want it to be ideally less than 5.1 millimole per litre, or between 4 and 5.1 millimole per litre. We also want to get hemoglobin A1C or HbA1c, it's often referred to, or glycated hemoglobin, it's also often referred to. This is an indicator of our 3-month fasting blood glucose trend, so it's a bit more accurate. It's not so easy influenced by what happened the day before. So glycated hemoglobin, we're looking for anything less than 5.3. As we start to get higher in the 5s, that's when we would consider an individual to have insulin resistance, whereby their body isn't able to tolerate carbohydrates very well, and potentially their body is storing fat very effectively. And the progression of that insulin resistance would be type 2 diabetes, which you may have heard referred to as like lifestyle associated diabetes, which it is reversible if we get on top of it early enough and the individual's commitment to their diet and lifestyle choices is made early enough. It is absolutely reversible, type 2 diabetes. The other one we could get as part of this chapter is fasting insulin. Fasting insulin is really important, I think an interesting marker for everybody to get done, but specifically anybody who is at risk of metabolic disease, who perhaps is carrying extra weight, has high blood pressure or dyslipidemia. For anybody who's been told they have polycystic ovarian syndrome, for women entering perimenopause or in the middle of perimenopause, this is important. And fasting insulin is an indicator of our insulin response. So the higher, the worst, basically. And I again have a very sensitive reference range because I want to see insulin levels optimal, and I want to get on top of high insulin levels early. You know, someone once put it very, very poignantly, which is that insulin will save lives, and without it, you know, we would be dead, but it's a Goldilocks scenario. Too low, no good. Too high, also no good, because it's inflammatory, it disrupts the liver, it promotes fat storage. So you don't want excess insulin. Oh, and it also triggers the ovaries to make more testosterone. So in women, not ideal. So don't get me wrong, there's other blood testing that I might often do in clinic with clients when there is, you know, perhaps some other things going on, preconception, pregnancy, a disease state, thyroid condition. But these are a really nice starting point, purely and simply if you are considering a plant-based diet or already on a plant-based diet. Hopefully you've taken some notes, so you've got your little cheat sheet of what you're going to go and talk to your doctor about if you want to get this testing done. Don't forget, I also said that you can use a platform like iScreen, which I think is available to those in New South Wales, Victoria, and Western Australia. I don't believe it's available in Queensland, but you know, if you don't have the access to iScreen, you can certainly go through your doctor. Make sure you're working with an individual who can help you to assess these results, again, from that functional lens. I'm certainly available for one-on-one consultations. You know, allow about 2 or 3 weeks and you should be able to get an appointment, and you can explore what it means to work with me on my website, which is nutritionally.com, and head to /work with me. That's where you can look at the options for one-on-one consultations, one-on-one programs, and then, of course, plant-based Kickstarter, which I mentioned before. Plant-based Kickstarter won't allow for individual bloods analysis unless you want to have a consult in addition to doing that program. And if you're interested, the next program begins in February 2022, which I'm very excited about. It'll be a 4th round of plant-based Kickstarter. But really nice to share this information with you. I hope it hasn't been too much. You know, I'm well aware that we don't really all have the capacity to memorize everything that we hear in the space of 40 or 45 minutes, but hopefully there's been some takeaways here that can mean something to you and help you extend your health and your quality of life. And hopefully if you've been thinking about a plant-based diet, this just gives you like a really solid like to-do list of, you know, here's what I need to do before I take it on, or here's what I need to do in the first few months of taking it on. Because I'm such a big believer in the power of nutrition to support our optimal quality of life. And I am a big believer in plant-based nutrition. However, like everything when it comes to nutrition, we need to be aware of whether or not we're doing things optimally, and what's optimal for you won't be, you know, the optimal for the person next to you. And all of these considerations just become they become even more important when you're taking on a plant-based diet to your nutrition, because the reality is that there are some nutritional flaws within the plant-based diet, and so you need to understand if those flaws are impacting you, and if you need to start to bridge the gap, you know, with the strategic use of supplements or the strategic changes in your diet. So hopefully it's been helpful. Feel free to drop me some feedback over on Instagram. My handle there is Nutritionally. Take care of yourselves, enjoy your food, be smart about it, and hopefully I will cross your path again one day soon. Bye.